So here we are in Unreal. This is our piece of Alaska, and this is the FBX, and with a material applied, making use of all the maps that we exported. As you can see, it results pretty well. I'll show you how the material has been built. It's pretty simple. So I'm not really an Unreal expert, so you can achieve things, do much more complex and um, much more interesting stuff that will allow you to take even better advantage of these assets. These are supposed to work in a distance, but they can actually work well close by as long as you have the proper materials adapted to them. Um, Let me show you from above. Really nice looking terrain here. It's definitely different from generating something like only based on procedural methods. Using this combination of both systems really gives you an interesting result. So let's have a quick look at just the basic material that I created, and I'll show you how it's done. So the basic material that I created, let me open up the master material. As you can see here, so we have the standard parameters for metallic, specular, and roughness. These are exposed, as you can see here. We have the textures for each one of the asset, the ambient occlusion, the materials mask, the normals, and tint texture, roughness and specular. And then we have the textures that you can assign to each one of these materials. So we have the grass, the rock, and the sand. We also have a global control for the tiling of these textures, and we have a tint multiplier and a trees area multiplier. Let's see what these are doing. So basically, if we have a look here, so typical stuff, the texture type parameter, multiplying the UV coordinates and going into all three textures, both the rock, grass, and sand. Then we're using the masks to combine them using a LARP. So I'm starting with the rock. On top of the rock, based on the green mask, I am combining it with the grass and doing the same process, combining the result of these two based on the blue channel of the material masks, which will give me the sand. Finally, we also have here one more step on the linear on the LERPs, which is combining um, applying a darker version of the so I have the grass here and I'm multiplying it by this parameter, which is the tree areas multiplier, multiplying it and combining it through the use of the alpha channel, which is where we store the trees mask. Here we also have a tint. So this is the tint multiplier. I'm basically just combining the our tint texture with white based on this value, the tint multiplier, and then multiplying it on top, multiplying it over the textures combination. And that's basically it. So then we have our normals and our ambient occlusion to the proper channels. Pretty simple stuff. And as you can see here, it gives us a pretty nice result. I'll just make some adjustments so you can see it in real time. So let me open the instance of the material that's assigned to this object. And as you can see here, let me try to make this smaller. And if I play with these parameters, you see the tree mult. We can darken the areas where we had the trees, which gives us a nice illusion, almost as if we had trees, even though we don't have any relief, but it gives us kind of that texture. And if you're using this pretty far away, it might be enough. So that's a small trick on the material. I'm actually not using it as strong. I was using it at around 0.75 or something. Just gives me a nice variation. which also breaks up the tiling. As you can see, we don't have much of the tiling effect on this. We can't really see it. There's a little bit going on here and there, but not much. And that's also because of this parameter, the tint multiplier. So if we put this at 0, you'll see that these are just the textures, but we can combine this with the tint texture that we exported. Say if we go to 0.8, you'll see it's a lot, but it kind of darkens stuff. You might need to process the tint texture, but it definitely creates more variation. I was using 0.6 value, and I kind of like the result. This will affect everything, not just the grass, but also the rocks. Next, the other parameter is just the tiling. So if we repeat it less, let's say 5, we have bigger patterns. Of course, if we see this close, it doesn't make any sense, but if you're looking at this from a distance, that type of variation might be interesting to have as well. Okay, and this is also affecting the rocks. Okay, so we have variation on the rocks, and it's a global tiling parameter. And that's basically it. Pretty straightforward material, nothing special. I'm going to put this back to 16 or 20, and that's basically it. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of other assets. Just went into open topography. As before, we kind of selected a certain area and we processed those points, the LiDAR information, through the 3 digital assets that we created, and exported the FBX and the textures, and played with them inside Unreal. To be honest, you don't need much work. Once you have one working, you can grab as much pieces of the same region as you want, and you get pretty much a very consistent look on all your pieces, and some really nice patches of terrain that you can use either for actual terrain or just for skybox elements to kind of fill that horizon. It gives you some really nice silhouettes, some really nice looking texture, and this can be done now automatically with just loading up different LiDAR datas. So I'm going to show you another one from the region of Alaska. Actually, before that, let me show you a version of this where I actually exported with some trees planes. Okay, now this is with actual trees planes. So it's basically just 2 planes perpendicular to each other. Okay, nothing fancy. Same texture on all the trees, and so really nothing fancy. But again, it's so you can see I'm making use of the scattering points that we had from that we actually created based on the LiDAR data as well. So, and we get again a bit of a more complex silhouette. If you're going to be using this at this distance, for instance, it might work, but that's to you. But just so you can see how you can create this. The material for these tree planes is pretty straightforward as well. I can show it to you. So the material is basically, let me open the master. So the material is basically just a regular material, which is set to blend mode masked, and here you have 2-sided foliage, and then the standard parameters of 0 metallic, 0.005 specular, some roughness, and the tree texture. Okay, just some PNG that I got from Google, searching on Google, and then you just connect the alpha channel to the opacity mask, and you get nice looking trees. At least for this, have a very low poly version, okay, of trees. Doesn't work close by, as you can see, but at a distance, kind of gives you a good illusion. If we compare one with the other, okay, this is without the trees and with the trees. Now, looking at a different piece of Alaska, let's have a look at a different piece of Alaska. So this is a different piece of terrain that I brought from Alaska as well. And this is a bigger area. But again, the idea is for us to use this to fill the horizon with stuff, and gives us some same material exactly being applied. The only difference is it's a different instance so that I can actually load the proper normal maps and occlusion, and it gives you this nice result. Works really well from above as well. Above is always dangerous because of the tiling, but as you can see here, it still looks pretty decent from this distance. Now let's have a look at something completely different, which is, for instance, this area, a piece of Colorado. So it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same material. Even the only difference is that I changed the textures that I'm using. Instead of using a texture of grass, a texture of rock, and a texture of sand, I'm using kind of a yellow desert rock, and then I also have another kind of desert rock being applied on where in place of the grass, and then I also have another kind of more sandy thing going on, and you get this nice looking effect landscape, again based on natural landscapes, and you can just instance them and fill your horizons or areas far away, or you can even just generate a normal height field with this and use it that way as well. Okay, but the intention of these pieces was still to use it from a good distance. Now, what else? I have here another test that I did, which was pretty early on. Basically, just the idea was to test the system out. Also pretty cool. I do have some artifacts here because of the way I exported the geometry. I tried a technique where I actually projected the trees onto the terrain, and gives me kind of these pyramids. But in terms of reading the silhouette from afar, it's pretty interesting result. And again, it's just the same thing but processed through a set of data, lighter data brought in from open topography and processed through some pretty similar nodes, digital assets, as we had before. And if we look at this from above, don't mind the artifacts, but look at the complexity that we get here, the variation, the complex shapes. This asset will work really well if we start creating copies of this. This is pretty lightweight. Okay, it's another very lightweight poly, so it just means that if we kind of start rotating this, scaling it, we can create some infinite kind of type of horizon with basically just one asset, I think. Here you can see the asset in action, filling the horizon of a piece of terrain, that like we did for the first tutorial. Let me actually go to the start playing. Okay, and there we have our assets filling the horizon really nicely. Here we can see it filling the horizon pretty well. Always the same asset. Okay, so just a quick demo of the assets working inside the engine. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. It's a pretty long one, I know, but I think it's worth it. We've covered a lot of techniques that will be useful for many different things, not just for this type of application. And I hope you find this useful. You can now generate a lot of terrains with real world data. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.